Proverbs 21. The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the heart. To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked, are sin. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. The getting of treasures by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor and a snare of death. The violence of the wicked will sweep them away because they refuse to do what is just. The way of the guilty is crooked, but the conduct of the pure is upright. It is better to live in a corner of the housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome wife. The soul of the wicked desires evil. His neighbor finds no mercy in his eyes. When a scoffer is punished, the simple becomes wise. When a wise man is instructed, he gains knowledge. The righteous one observes the house of the wicked. He throws the wicked down to ruin. Whoever closes his ear to the cry of the poor will himself call out and not be answered. A gift in secret averts anger, and a concealed bribe, strong wrath. When justice is done, it is a joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. One who wanders from the way of good sense will rest in the assembly of the dead. Whoever loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich. The wicked is a ransom for the righteous, and the traitor for the upright. It is better to live in a desert land than with a quarrelsome and fretful woman. Precious treasure and oil are in a wise man's dwelling, but a foolish man devours it. Whoever pursues righteousness and kindness will find life, righteousness, and honor. A wise man scales the city of the mighty and brings down the stronghold in which they trust. Whoever keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps himself out of trouble. Scoffer is the name of the arrogant, haughty man who acts with arrogant pride. The desire of the sluggard kills him, for his hand refuses to labor. All day long he craves and craves, but the righteous gives and does not hold back. The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination, how much more when he brings it with evil intent. A false witness will perish, but the word of a man who hears will endure. A wicked man puts on a bold face, but the upright gives thought to his ways. No wisdom, no understanding, no counsel can avail against the Lord. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. Yeah, that last one is a pretty famous proverb. The pattern I noticed in this chapter is that a lot of these have to do with the long-term results of behavior today, whether it's the sluggard who starves in the future, or someone who speaks a false witness today and it comes back to bite him later, or plans that we set today that don't turn out the way that we expect them to years down the road. So there seems to be a consistent theme throughout this chapter, not maybe in every proverb, but in a lot of them. Starting from let's start with the 4 questions here. What proverb speaks to you? What puzzles you? What surprises you? And what offends you? Scott and Daniel, are there any proverbs in here that particularly stand out to you, that really speak to you?
I've always enjoyed Proverbs 3. To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. I mean, that's his heart. It's for us to not apologize, do something and apologize later for it. What's that phrase? Whereby you will do something and then ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm not sure about the phrase, but
I
know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just the antithesis of who he is,
Yeah, and this proverb is repeated in other words further down.
27.
Yeah, 27.
The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination. How much more when he brings it with evil intent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is the counterpoint. It's not that God needs sacrifice.
No.
He sacrifices for our benefit. And if we're not bringing it with the right heart, not really doing anything for us. Can you think of modern applications to this? We don't have a temple or an altar right now, so there's not a lot that we're not bringing offerings to the temple. So how can this principle apply for today? I think verse 3 is probably a little bit easier to see than verse 27. Sorry, go ahead, Daniel.
I was going to say here in verse 3, to do the righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Is that the one we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Sacrifice depends. an unwanted sacrifice would be wanting to put our selfish ambitions before righteousness and justice. I know there's so many people in certain parties that want to make the sacrifices to do their to get their agendas passed and to do their agendas, and they forego righteousness and justice of God. I see that pattern going on with our political system that's going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
The furthering of agendas versus the furthering of God's agenda and what he wants. So that's something I see that's relevant to today.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of other proverbs in this chapter that relate to that. I'm trying to remember which one. Verse 21. Whoever pursues righteousness and kindness, and the word there is chesed, will find life, righteousness, and honor. And a lot of people think that it's kind to encourage things that make people feel better. They've got their own ideas of what justice is, the term social justice. Leveling out the playing field is the ultimate goal, because then everyone feels the same. Nobody feels like they're less than somebody else. Or if somebody really passionately wants to live in this particular way, then we should encourage them because that's who they are. And that's being nice. But nice isn't the same as chesed, or God's kindness, the actual Hebrew word behind that word. In God's righteousness, in his, sometimes it's kind to be harsh and to make people hurt. You think God loves Israel still, and he shows them chesed by removing the wicked from their midst. That's an important part of kindness. If somebody has cancer, if somebody has a brain tumor that makes them feel amazing, the right thing to do is not to let the brain cancer keep growing because it makes them feel better. The right thing to do is remove it. And it's the same thing with a lot of these things that people today want to call justice and mercy and kindness. They're really not. They're the opposite. They make people feel good right now, but destroy their lives later.
I think the goal, or the point that he's trying to make, is I think his preference would have been to never have a sacrificial world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or a system. He would have rather have had obedience. There are a number of plays and science fiction movies, or books, I should say, or short stories, whereby the current population is dealing with some sort of supernatural being, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they inquire of the natural being, where do you come from, or what is it that sets you apart? And they in essence go to we had an experience in the garden like you did, but we obeyed. So it's a modern day story hook, but it is interesting because that, I think, was his hope, and his goal wasn't for us to fall. It was for us to obey. Now, he knew what was going to happen, and he created this system to address that and atone for that. But he's coming back, and when he does, he's going to want obedience.
Mm.
I believe personally that the sacrificial system still will exist to rectify, because when he's back, people will fall away. So to me, it's suggestive of, even when he's back, people are going to struggle with their free will.
Mm-hmm.
But the ideal is for us to obey.
Yeah. Not most. Out of the 5 kinds of sacrifices, 2 of them were designed to give some kind of temporary fix for mistakes. And yeah, it would be much better if we never made the mistakes that necessitate the sacrifice in the first place. Yeah, so those 2 verses, 3 and 27, are talking about the same thing, but from opposite sides.
Yeah.
Verse 3 is saying it would be better to just live a righteous life, so you don't need to do the sacrifices. And verse 27 is saying if you need to do the sacrifices, make sure that you are intending to live a righteous life, that you are repenting from the thing that you did that caused you to make sacrifice. If you're just coming for confession and you're going to go right back out and do the same thing again, what's the point in that? Don't even bother. I don't think God forgives people who are not repenting. And I also don't think that means that we have to be perfect. You repent from something doesn't mean you're never going to do it again. It means that you are intending never to do it again. You're going to do your best. But we are weak. We are flawed people, and we are going to do those things because it's just who we are. So what about you, Daniel? Do you have one proverb in here that really stood out to you?
Yes, it was verse 1, actually.
Okay. It is an interesting one. I had to look at some of the Hebrew words on that one to figure out what it was really saying. What are your thoughts on it?
I know that there's a scripture that says, out of our belly shall flow streams of living water. I think that was, and I was not expecting it to be the king's heart that the water was coming out of instead of his gut. That was something that puzzled me and caught me off guard on that one. The heart, I guess the heart is connected to the belly in one sense, but I don't know. That's Hebraic thought that I'm unaware of as far as that goes. But I know
Daniel,
that
go ahead, sorry. Daniel, who do you think is turning the stream wherever he will, the king or God?
God, for sure.
So am I interpreting this correctly, that the king is full of ideas on how to go about things, but God orders it aright?
I believe that's maybe, I do believe that's the gist of it.
Okay.
But I think there's more to this than meets the eye. The king's heart, of course. Go ahead.
I was thinking of it from a different angle, but I think the way that I was thinking of it is certainly related, but I was thinking that the stream, I don't remember what the Hebrew word there is, but it specifically refers to a man-made stream, not just a mountain stream or a spring, but to a canal. So this is something that has been purposefully made, and we can dig a canal or we can appoint a king, but God is the one who turns him to his will, who makes the king do what needs to be done. And sometimes that's leading the nation into further evil, giving them more of what they want. Sometimes it's correcting the nation. But I think one of the things that we can learn from that is, especially looking at the examples of Pharaoh and Saul, that the more power you have over other people, the less free will you have. Within the boundaries of that canal, the water can splash around all at once, but God is still going to direct it to his purposes so that things work out the way that he wants them to. But your interpretation there, Daniel, which I really like, gives another implication in that the water isn't just the king's heart, but the things that flow from the king's heart, so that he is a source of life and justice to the people. And that's his purpose for living. So if he is a good king, then that's what he does, and God helps him to do that. So I think that's a really great picture.
But is not the king representative of the people?
Yeah, like you get the government you deserve, sort of thing.
Yeah. Maybe not in a kingship so much, because sometimes the people were saddled with an unjust king, but there's a correlation between the king and his subjects, because they are subject to his will.
Yeah, it's a positive feedback loop that the king reflects the state of the people, but then the king can help guide the state of the people.
Right.
He can move it in better or worse directions. And God has a strong hand in which way it's going to go. And I suspect that when you get an evil king who just makes things worse, like we've got right now, it's possibly because God wants to, like he did with the Canaanites, he wants their wickedness to come to its fullness so that he can then move on to judgment. what he told Adam when they were, not Adam, what he told Abraham when they were approaching Sodom, or rather not what he told Abraham, but the negotiation that went on, how God said that he wouldn't destroy Sodom and Gomorrah if there were even 10 righteous people in the city. But there weren't. Turned out that there was one at most, maybe three at most, but probably just one.
Yeah, I don't think
it wasn't
daughters.
yeah, it doesn't really seem like it. So I think that God probably gave Sodom a wicked ruler because the city was wicked and he needed it to move closer to that point where he could pass judgment. Like even God couldn't convict the innocent. So he gave people more opportunities to dig their heels in and become wicked, to do more of what they were already intent on doing.
Sometimes a ruler will evoke from his people their true heart, whether that ruler is good or evil. Go to Hitler.
Mhm.
There was some massively brave and honorable people within the German population that helped against this evil, but for the most part, the population embraced what was being peddled. That was a spark to evoke from the people what their true colors were.
Yeah, and people ask, how can God allow the Holocaust? One of the purposes for that obviously was to move the Jews back to Israel, push them in that direction. At least seems like that was one of God's purposes. But another purpose, it could have been to complete that wickedness of the German people of the day. Make sure that they showed their true colors to the whole world, so that when we went and firebombed Dresden, wherever else we firebombed and destroyed, that nobody could question that this was something that had to be done, or at least there were no excuses. Not that it was a nice thing to do, of course.
I know there's something, I don't mean to interrupt. I noticed something too. It says the king's heart. Is that lev in the Hebrew there used? Or is it?
Yeah, it's lev.
Okay. That's interesting because in Hebraic, the heart is not the one in the chest, it's your mind. So it's your soul, your emotions, everything is there in your mind. And it's in the hand of the Lord. And he's manipulating he's manipulating the minds by presenting options and choices in their minds of good things to do. It's like he's testing them. It almost seems it's like a test. God appoints leaders, of course, and this is a testing of these leaders, and he's turning it which way he wants, because he's trying to find out if they're going to be obedient to him.
Yeah.
The living water has potential because it comes from God. Mayim Kaim comes from God. And what we do with that Mayim Kaim, if we abuse it, if we misuse it, then God is going to cut us off. That man-made is cut off. He's going to dam it up. He's going to reroute that water to another leader that he's going to try to appoint. So
yeah,
that's just my extra thoughts on this. As I look at it again.
Yeah, and I was just looking at the Hebrew word there for stream also, and interestingly, that word is peleg. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
That's the name of the ancestor of, or the descendant of Noah, the descendant of Shem too, I think. When Genesis says his name was Peleg because in his days was the earth divided. And his name can mean split or division, and apparently it can mean canal too. And if that name, the days that the earth was divided, if the purpose of that was, if that was a result of the Tower of Babel and Nimrod's actions, It's the same thing. God allows their wickedness to come to fruition so that then he can pass judgment. And the judgment was dividing them up.
Hmm.
And it's very similar with other nations, peoples throughout history. The Canaanites weren't just conquered by Israel, they were scattered. And the tribes of the Amalekites that were out in the desert between Babylon and Judea that caused so many problems later on were probably largely made up of Canaanite refugees or their descendants. So when a people's wickedness comes to that point where God needs to step in and pass judgment, he gives them a ruler who completes the job, who guides them into, lets them do what they really want to do. And then he destroys and scatters them. Maybe he uses another nation to do that, maybe a natural disaster, or maybe he scrambles their language.
So if you take that approach and walk it backwards, is not a king or ruler's purpose to refine his people?
Yeah. To refine them, either refine them as dross or refine them as silver, one of the two.
Right.
Yeah, we're reading verse 1, Lisa. We talked a little bit about verse 3 and then went back to verse 1.
Okay, thanks. I'm traveling, so I'm just going to be listening.
Okay, that's right. I know verse 9 is the one that I thought stood out to me. And I mentioned this to Scott earlier.
You're
It's
on
an
the roof
awkward one to talk
right
about.
now, right?
So far, I've avoided the roof. So it's better to live in a corner of the housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome wife. Now, most people want to read that and say, well, that's misogynistic. They usually focus on the quarrelsome wife.
But why is she quarrelsome? That's a big question.
That's the real question, I think. Because if most of these proverbs are advice from a father to son, and most of the proverbs in this particular chapter are talking about what did you do years ago that has brought you to this circumstance?
Yep.
That puts a whole nother light on this verse.
Mm-hmm.
And in my personal experience, if a man is indecisive, if he is passive and isn't being that king from verse 1, where he's refining his family and moving it in a positive direction, then that creates insecurity. It creates confusion and problems in the household. And years down the road, now you've got a wife who is stressed out on pins and needles and maybe thinking of her husband, whether consciously or not, as the enemy because he's the source of her insecurity. And so now he ends up on the roof because he can't live in the house with his wife that he was supposed to be protecting and providing for and guiding all these years and neglected.
Symbolically, that's very interesting, because if the man or the husband is to be the cover, then this is alluding to a location that is a cover. The roof is a cover over the household. So it's something poetic.
Yeah, that is interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. But yeah, it's kind of like saying, if you don't choose to be the roof, we're going to send you up to be the roof anyways.
Yeah.
And all the problems that happen, he is responsible for them. Some people are just quarrelsome by nature. And I'm not saying that every problem in a house is the husband or father's fault. It's not true, because every person is they're all their own people and they make their own choices. And every person exists on a continuum of passive to aggressive, or lots of other different scales too. But on the whole, if there are consistent pathologies in a house, it usually does go back somewhere to the husband.
I hate this verse.
There was something that should have been done years ago, or a pattern that has been creating a problem that maybe we don't know what the pattern is. Something has gone wrong somewhere along the line and has not been corrected. And that's how they end up in this situation at verse 9.
I got a question. Are verses 8, 9, and 10 connected there?
I don't see an obvious connection other than the way that all the Proverbs are connected.
There was, well, I mean, grammatically, were they connected? do they run into each other? Because there's something I noticed. It just hit me. David was on the roof of the top of his palace. So when he saw Bathsheba.
Right.
Mhm.
So this almost sounds like Solomon acknowledging that it's the same kind of thing going on. He realizes his dad wouldn't should have maybe chose a different route than he should have when he was watching her on the rooftop bathing.
Yeah. Then you got to ask, why was he up there?
Yeah.
Whether he was on the rooftop or not, I'm not sure, but he was definitely out checking things out where he shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
And what brought him to this place? We can look at his relationship with Michal or Mitchell or whatever her name is. I can never figure out how to pronounce that one. And not Mitchell, but Michal, probably. That relationship was broken from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And it really seems like it was because David was not being a husband to her. He won her by emasculating a bunch of Philistines and then left her behind while he went gallivanting around the country. Partly because her father was trying to kill him, but, excuses. But whatever the cause, they had a broken relationship and she never had children and he essentially put her away. That was just a mess.
Yeah. If you also look at the structures of the houses they had back then, the corners were the unstable spots on the house, if I remember correctly. They were on the edge. If it's talking about what I think it's talking about the edge of it's talking about being on the edge of the housetop. It's not even talking about being in the center or close to stability. It's talking about being on the edge kind of thing. If that's what I'm reading into correctly here.
The kanaf, hina, or corner. I was thinking it might be kanaf, like the four corners of the garments.
Yeah.
Different word, but I don't know. No, I don't really know much about their architecture, except that the rooftop was not an unusual place for people to be, really.
Yeah.
Just another room of the house.
Yeah, the corners were unstable a little bit, though. I think they were kind of rounded off a little bit. I've looked at some of the Hebrew structures of online, like different ancient sites and stuff. And in Israel, some of the ancient architecture of the way they built their homes, they were really square. Their building structures were kind of square at the top. So that could be why it says a corner too, is because it's kind of square up there.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's what I've
as
seen.
far as the vocabulary and grammar between those three verses, I don't know enough Hebrew to be able to tell anything.
Oh, okay.
If you take that approach that this is a reference to David, I would argue maybe not, because it is saying it is better to live on the corner of the housetop than to live with a quarrelsome woman. So is it better to put yourself in a position of temptation than to live with a quarrelsome woman? I would think not. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's true. But you put yourself in greater temptation when your house is not in order.
But
because
it says
if
it
you've
is
got
better.
a bad relationship, it's a warning to the son to make sure that his house is in order so that he doesn't have to go live on the rooftop.
Yeah.
But one of the other dangers, then not directly addressed in this proverb, is that if your relationship with your wife is broken, then you're going to have more temptations outside the home too, because you're going to have more incentive to be looking for somebody else. It's better to keep the relationship healthy from the very beginning rather than to get into that spot where you're ending up sleeping on the roof or in somebody else's bedroom.
I see. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting where these things take us.
I had experienced this probably January, whereby I met a couple, and I presume they were husband and wife. They weren't. They were boyfriend and girlfriend. She remained married for tax purposes. And the boyfriend girlfriend actually had a relationship with the husband, and that they would go on vacations together. And so you just see how unstable that is from a marriage or a family group, where you introduce all of these ideas of supposed stability versus non. It's sad.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
that's nuts. All right, so back to those 4 questions.
Okay, verse 13. Whoever
Verse
closes his
13.
ears to the cry of the poor will himself call out and not be answered. How do you reconcile that with our modern society, whereby we have all of these programs that the government is employing supposedly to help the poor, and you couple that with the various churches that have their programs to help the poor and so forth? It's a convoluted setup now, I believe.
Yeah, it is, and I think that's on purpose. Maybe I have a non-intuitive answer to that. Government welfare is a way to let people close their ears to the cry of the poor and pretend as if they're listening. They
Yeah.
are letting somebody else deal with the poor instead of doing it themselves. And I am just as guilty as everybody else. I don't necessarily go out of my way to go find poor people to help. I don't have a lot of poor friends. And I don't know if that's a flaw of my own, or if that's just the way that life has come about. But it does bother me sometimes. And I'm opposed to government welfare programs. I think, charity should be local first, family, then your local community. Very rarely should the government ever be involved in it, except as there's the one tie that the central storehouse in your own town. And that's not the federal government, that's your own little town government handling that. And that's about as far as I would allow government, if I were in charge, of course. That's as far as I would allow the government to be involved in any kind of welfare programs. But am I willing to step up and take over those functions myself? To be totally honest, I haven't done it, so I don't really have any evidence that I would be, other than a few forays out into a soup kitchen.
It's hard to discern the poor now.
Yeah, well, in America, who is really poor? I mean, some people are poor because they have mental illnesses and other problems that prevent them from holding jobs or end up on the street, and they're definitely poor. But
it's interesting, within this 21, you have reference to the consequence of not working. And now you have this tied in with it within the entire proverb. It's a flip side of it almost, because there is a consequence that can lead to poverty, but I don't believe that's what this is talking about. Maybe I'm wrong.
You mean verse 13?
This to me is, verse 13 is suggesting that you need to listen to the cries of the poor. And when I hear that, I'm thinking of gleaning, the fields and gleaning, and you have a setup so as to help people that are truly poor, but not people who refuse to work. The grasshopper and the ant type of thing.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think that if they're able-bodied people and there's work to be done, I don't think they should be getting any kind of charity unless they're at least making an effort to do that work. There are lots of people who are unable to work, and that's a totally different story. But verse 13, I think, is talking about those people who are truly disadvantaged. And in that particular culture, if you didn't own land, you were totally dependent on other people for your sustenance, not for handouts, but for work. You had no right to demand work from anybody. You had a right to gleanings, so there was no reason for you to starve as long as people were allowing you your right to glean their fields. But it's not about people who are it's not about beggars who don't have any particular reason to be begging. And I think it's the consequence. The second half is about those relationships. If there are people who are suffering and legitimately unable to provide for themselves, and you are ignoring them, or you're contributing to that, not only does God see that, and God will arrange things against you, but other people are going to see it too. And if you do come upon hard times, why should anybody else help you? And you got to look at your community has known you your whole life, and they're going to know who you are. And they're going to know that you were never willing to help anybody when they were down. So why should they help you now when you're down? It's not
Yeah,
necessarily
karma.
saying that's good, but that's just the way people behave.
Yeah, natural law karma type of thing.
I had one for the puzzles. Verse 18. I mean, it doesn't puzzle me now, but it did when I first read it. The wicked is a ransom for the righteous and the traitor for the upright. And my first thought was Yeshua is a ransom for the wicked and the righteous, and he wasn't wicked. He's not a traitor. So how does that work? But thinking about the king and the ways that things are supposed to work, if the king is doing his job, his kindness towards his people is to save the righteous from the wicked. So the ransom for the life of the righteous is the punishment of the wicked. If somebody is a murderer, God says we're supposed to take their life. And it's not out of vengeance. We're not like punishing them or making them suffer because they made somebody else suffer. That's not our job. But it is rescuing the remaining righteous, those people who remain, who live in the land. The land is going to be poisoned by the innocent blood that is not atoned for. And the death of the murderer atones for the blood of the victim, at least on the land, not necessarily on the blood that is on the murderer. So it's the execution of the wicked, or at least the wicked who are made to pay restitution for their crimes. Those are the ones who are paying a ransom for the lives of the righteous. They have to be removed for the sake of the other people. So it's a very practical proverb that sounds more lofty, I think, than it's intended.
So when you have corruption of the justice system and you do not have real justice doled, then the entire society suffers because you do not have a standard that's upheld. I'm just thinking of our current society, and that is an explanation that makes perfect sense. So if you do not have justice meted out, then you now have all of these arguments that are basically encouraging crime or sin, evil, whatever term you want to use, because you have a corrupted system.
Yeah, people are opposed to the death penalty for a few reasons, but the first one, the principal reason, is that we don't have a right to take other people's lives. But that's just false. God is the one who decides what's right and wrong, and if he commands us to do something, then we have a right to do it. And the other reason, of course, is that our courts are corrupt, and we convict innocent people all the time. It's not all the time. We're not always convicting innocent people of murder, but it does happen. But that's no different than in 1500 BC when God commanded murderers to be put to death. Their standards of evidence were much lower than ours. They didn't have DNA and fingerprints and all these forensic science. They had eyewitnesses. And if there were two people who came forward and said, I saw that guy do it, that was enough. And that guy had to be executed. And to say that it's cruel or unjust or something to execute murderers, it's being cruel and unjust to the survivors, to the people who are left, because now there will be more murder and there will be more injustice. Yeah, and just the only real justice is that which is in accord with God's commandments. Anything that's opposed to them is unjust by definition, because God defines justice. I really don't like hearing myself talk all that much.
It's just, though.
What's that Hebrew word for ransom? I'm just curious.
Ransom is kofar, or a covering, an atonement.
That's interesting.
Brown Driver Briggs, apparently it's not exactly the same word as atonement, but it's certainly related. It's the same root.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, kafar, 3722. is pretty sure that's the word for atonement. Yeah, to cover, that's to atone. So the only difference, actually they're spelled exactly the same. So I'm not sure how they would tell the difference. Kof, Pe, Resh. There were no vowel markings in the original Proverbs. So those vowel markings would have to be tradition or maybe derived from the Septuagint or something. And that actually makes it even more literal. That the death of the murderer is literally a covering for the death of the righteous who was killed. And you can look back at the story of Cain and Abel for an illustration. Cain killed Abel, and God said that your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. The just thing would have been for Cain to be killed. And he even said to God that if you kick me out and I go out there, whoever sees me is going to kill me, because God has commanded that he should be killed. But it was God's mercy on Cain that allowed him to live. Ultimately, though, it's all part of God's plan. I don't really understand it, but we can see what happened from that. That Cain's descendants were the ones who, at least traditionally, created the conditions that caused the flood. Of course, Seth's descendants did it too, because Noah was the only righteous man left, so they all had to have been in on it at some point. So that might not be an accurate tradition.
There was a Nephilim that came down too. So
yeah, but they took advantage of something that, if the people were righteous, I don't think they ever would have had the opportunity to do whatever it was they did.
Oh yeah, agreed.
So Daniel, is there a particular proverb that puzzled you?
I think I mentioned the one about the first one. It was the first one.
Oh, okay. All right. What about surprise? I know puzzle and surprise are kind of overlapping.
Yeah, those two kind of overlap for me on that first one.
Well, I wrote down verse 12. I don't remember what that one was, though. Let's look it up. The righteous one observes the house of the wicked. He throws the wicked down to ruin. Okay, yeah, it surprised me because of how aggressive it makes the righteous one sound. In the English Standard Version here, capitalizes righteous one, and they're implying that the righteous one refers to God, or at least to Jesus. And I don't think that's really what was intended. I think he's just saying that a righteous person observes the house of the wicked and he throws it down to ruin. And frequently that's not really true. But really what surprised me was just the Proverbs are usually not so gung-ho about the triumph of the righteous over the wicked. And in this case, I wrote that a wise and righteous man who has observed the chaos and pathology in the house of the wicked for any length of time will seize a good opportunity to destroy that house, not because he hates the wicked man or his family, but because he loves his own family and his community. And that goes right back to the idea that the righteous have an obligation to remove the wicked from their midst. And not for themselves. It's not necessarily out of self-defense, but there's nothing wrong with that. But it's to protect the entire community.
Yeah. So in today's society, the wicked are emulated. The wicked are lifted up. We try to become the trendsetters. So it's sad at the place we find ourselves now.
Yeah. And people who because righteous people didn't do this, because they didn't throw down the house of the wicked when they had a chance, now the wicked are running the whole country. One of the things that Solomon observes frequently in the Proverbs is that one of the differences between the righteous and the wicked is that the righteous are very forthright. They're simple to understand. They say what they mean. They're not complicated. Whereas the wicked are scheming, convoluted. They're complicated and they're deceptive. And this is how good communities and good nations become rotten, because we often don't really expect other people to be scheming. Righteous people tend to take other people at face value. And wicked people are not dealing at face value. They're not dealing honestly. And even though they often believe that they are, they're really not. They are scheming and always working to undermine morality and a people's adherence to God's commandments. And over time, they will infect, like leaven, they will infect the entire organization, the entire nation, until they're everywhere. And then there's nothing you can do about it. It's too late. It happened when you weren't even looking, because you didn't think that your next door neighbor was trying to do that. And maybe they weren't consciously trying to do that, but that's what they were doing anyways, whether they meant to or not. It's always a little bit at a time.
Verse 22, a wise man scales the city of the mighty and brings down the stronghold in which they trust.
Same thing.
Yeah, but why would you correlate that to what you're talking about? And that's a wise man's going to try to pull down the wicked that we were just talking about to avoid infection.
I wonder what's this word for mighty here. Mighty is Gibor, so just a mighty man, strong man. That word doesn't necessarily imply anything bad. A mighty man is also, like a great warrior is called a mighty man. So I'm a little bit puzzled why that word is chosen. I mean, I understand the point. The point is that this mighty man is a wicked one. He's a tyrant. But this does have a different kind of spin than the other verse, whereas the other one was, he's going to tear the whole thing down. But this guy's got to scale the walls. It's like he's a serious underdog here. So
yeah, he's got to
this
take
wise
on.
man he's got to be wily.
Right, he's got to take on the strongholds. He's got to take on the mores of where society is going in order to reclaim it. I think it does go hand in hand with what you were talking about. That last verse.
I think that this one is talking more about the strategy. Like the first one is talking about this is what has to happen. This one is more talking about how does it have to happen. And you can't, like, since the wicked right now run every major public institution. They run all of the education, they run the government, they run entertainment, everything. You can't just confront them head on. You can, but I don't think you're going to get anywhere. This guy is scaling the city of the mighty, so he has to get inside.
The fact that it says city, it suggests something established by the mighty. So you are taking on the establishment, almost literally.
Yeah, he's an outsider.
Yeah.
And he's having to scale it and get inside in order, in order to bring it down. Yeah, there's the case of, I can't remember which judge it was. The one judge who, I think he went to a Moabite king, and he was a delegation from Israel. He went there and they had this meeting, and then they were getting ready to leave. And he says, "Oh, king, I've got a secret message for you." And everybody else leaves, and he stays behind and stabs the Moabite king. There's an element of subterfuge. The wicked have established themselves and built their cities through subterfuge. And so it takes some wisdom to try to counter that. And
wily as a snake, right?
Yeah. Reminds me of another judge too, Gideon with his 300 men. And God sent him against the Midianites, I think. And God deliberately pared down his force to just 300 men, and they didn't attack the enemy directly. They fooled the enemy into thinking that they were a lot stronger and more numerous than they were, by using their clay jars with the lamps. They snuck into or got close to the camp, and then they all broke their jars and blew their trumpets and rushed into the camp, and the enemy fought themselves. So if you can find a way to make the enemy destroy himself, by tearing down his walls, undermining the very things that he is trusting in. But I don't think that you can do that just through your own devices. I think that, like Gideon and other examples in scripture, that takes God's help. Which brings me to, the horse is made ready for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. Which is not to say that we should not make ready our horses. We are supposed to prepare for battle, arm ourselves, gear up and show up ready to fight. But victory comes from God, not from our weapons. And I don't know exactly how to apply that in our current situation. So what else we got here? Is anybody offended by anything? Is anybody offended? We already talked about the quarrelsome wife. There are actually 2 verses on that one too, but we can talk about the other one if you want, but I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between them. Trust everyone is scanning through the chapter. Verse 28, I thought was an interesting one because it could be interpreted in 2 completely different ways. A false witness will perish, but the word of a man who hears will endure. The first part is easy. A false witness will perish because God's law commands that a false witness be punished with the same punishment that his intended victim would have gotten. So if he accuses somebody else of murder and he's a false witness, then he is supposed to be executed instead. But the word of a man who hears will endure. It depends on what it means by hears. I read one commentator who said this is referring to a man who is listening, who is patient and hears out the entire case before he passes judgment. So this would be a judge, and he's hearing both sides of the story so that he doesn't just listen to the false witness. And his word will endure. The truth will come out, essentially, is what that's saying. And I read another commentary where it said, this is talking about people who hear and believe the false witness. And even if you execute the false witness, that lie is still out there and you can never take it back because now it's going to endure and other people are going to be repeating it. And I think both of those interpretations are true. I don't know which one is Solomon's intended meaning, but they're both accurate. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I had some thoughts to share.
Okay, go ahead.
As we've gone along in these Proverbs from what I've been, as long as I've been a part of it, I've noticed that this almost seems like an oral dissection of the Torah and upon the history of Israel up to this point. And it almost seems it seems a lot like the Talmud, sort of, in certain aspects, as far as wisdom, having wisdom in certain, but this is better than Talmud, though. This is from God. This is wisdom from God that flowed through Solomon. It just seems to me that it comes across as being like commentary, sort of, and like a reflection upon what all that has happened up to this point. And it just seems to be broken down just so much, almost like the way Yeshua did with his Beatitudes and his teachings and parables. It almost comes across as a repetition of Yeshua being like Solomon later on, dissecting the past, reflecting upon it, because he's a descendant of David as far as his parents and his earthly parents and stuff. He's in line for the kingship of David. So it just comes across as being a prelude to Yeshua for me. That's the way it comes across.
Yeah, I think in many ways that's true. I know Tom Bradford, he interprets when people called Yeshua the son of David, he interprets that as a reference to Solomon. They were saying that he was as wise as Solomon. I don't know if that's was a common idiom of the day or that's something that he came up with on his own. I don't know. But it is an interesting idea.